Okay, so what is cultural warfare about? That's one thing. What's cultural warfare with Jon Croft about? That's another thing. So cultural warfare with Jon Croft is about talking about how silly the culture war is, but also how important a real culture is. And in understanding a real culture, we understand how important it is to fight for that real culture. But we don't do that by fighting through politics and things like this, which is where the term comes from. We believe in a different paradigm. So let's see. Oh, good. There's Rebecca. Are you there? Hello, Rebecca. Let's see. So what was I saying here? Oh, I think I hear you.
Hi.
There you are. How are you?
I'm good. I had a Bluetooth speaker that was competing for your sound.
Yep, that happens to me all the time. Yeah, I forget that I'll have the Bluetooth on somewhere.
Yeah.
So I thought I would talk about the film community tonight. I was going to talk about another subject, but then I prayed about it and I was like, no, there's something about it. I think I'm not ready for that other topic yet. So I thought I would talk about something I could talk about pretty quickly on the fly, right? When you look at my Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft profile on X, you can see it says, I'm on X, I'm on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. I'm the head writer at Media Moses. But it also says Film Bar Review co-host, filmmaker, and film prophet. So it's a lot of film stuff there that I'm digging into. And I can explain each of those things.
I like that, film prophet. I like that.
Yeah, that's more of the mystical side of it. But, for me, that's actually why I got a Twitter, is to listen to film people talk about film, and especially producers, because at the time I was learning how to be a producer. And this was in 2009, 2010, 2011. And I was learning how to be a film producer, which really meant working as hard as you can on sets to make sure everything happens. Apparently, I didn't realize that. I did that job. I did that essentially on Experiment 7, if you remember, you were there. And then at the end of production, Joe Davison, the director, was like, "You're a producer, Jon." And I was like, "Thanks. I don't know what you're talking about." But I knew that producers were important. I knew that they were everybody talks about them like they're the head honchos, the people in charge, them along with the directors. And so it felt like an honor, obviously, hearing him say that. He's the director, calling me a producer. And I did not ask to be a producer. I was willing to accept being a production assistant and anything that he wanted me to do.
Yeah.
This was 2008, 2009. And so after that, and then we went into post-production, which is what primarily was me and you making that film in post-production.
Yeah.
Although there was some great effects done as well. But we don't know how hard they worked on it, frankly. They could have done much worse, or they could have done much better. I don't know. And I'm not saying that the effects were bad. I'm just saying that we were not there for the effect, for the effects.
Yeah.
And even though I was the post-production supervisor on that film, but essentially I learned what a producer was, and these are the people who just make it happen behind the scenes along every stage of development and production and post-production, etc. They're there to make sure the film makes money. They're there to make sure the film gets made. And why is this their primary role? Because they are many times bonded by a company who asks them to fulfill a contractual agreement, which is to get the film made. And so that company is formed at the behest of you and the other investors or executive producers to get this film made. It could be a studio, right? And so what they're doing is they are putting this baby in your hands and saying, you need to make this film, and you're the one who's going to make it, and I trust you to make it. And so bonded means you've been insured, essentially, that if you do not make the film, you are on the hook to pay for this junk that you did produce. So you basically have to produce something. And so not every producer is bonded, but if you're a good one, if you're in PGA or whatever, you are most likely bonded. I'm not a bonded producer. That wasn't my focus, because I was really not focused on being a producer initially. I was focused on being a director. And the way I felt that I needed to be a director was to learn all the roles of production. And in doing that, it was kind of a respect to the golden age of filmmaking, where they would work their way up the ranks, right? Like, let's say you're an electrician, you're into the electric. Well, you got to learn all the stuff all the way up to, lighting or gaffer or whatever it is. And so you would join a union, and then you would just, pay in your 5 years, and then you'd move up the ranks, and then do another 5 years. So it was a lifelong commitment to this industry, and so I had a great amount of respect for that. But we don't have the golden age of Hollywood now. And the unions have limited power, if any, which their last little foray into strike has shown us. But I still respected the position of producers. So basically, this was seen to me as a great way to learn how to be a director and to continue that role, to possibly learn how to fund films. And then I eventually, in the mid-2010s, I was learning to fund films more. Before that, I was trying to get small films made, and did get a few small films made. And none of them were feature films, though. I had just worked on that one feature film with another director, Joe Davison, as I mentioned, and was a producer on that film. And then I eventually started to try to learn how to fund films, and this was mid to late 2010s. I stopped doing that at about 2018, but then when COVID hit, then it changed a lot of things for me, of course. It really took me out of the film industry, essentially. But one of the things I learned was about funding films. First of all, it's not my primary joy. I don't really enjoy things like funding films and working to get money for that kind of thing. What I like instead is doing what I consider to be the primary job of a producer or a director, which is to attach yourself to the best script possible.
Yeah.
And so to me, the script is of primary importance. And that means either knowing good writers or being a good writer yourself. Of course, I've always been a writer. So that was not, necessarily a big problem for me. But what I did get to do is learn what kind of scripts Hollywood wants. I learned kind of how the marketplace works through genre. Every genre is different. So every genre is looking for its own thing at any time. And at any one time, the genres are acting very differently. So knowing that marketplace is really essential if you're going to do genre filmmaking, which most people do. And there's a few genres that you can break into, and a few genres that are really hard to break into, such as, action filmmaking or sci-fi. Those are very difficult to break into. You basically don't break into those. You do a lot of other films first, and then you can kind of segue into those genres. But a film like a horror film, a film like a faith-based film, a film like a drama film, because they're so easy to make if you have a good script. A lot of these are actually fairly easy to make with a good script. And so that's just what you have a glut of in the market. And so those become easy markets to break into as a result, because there's just, by necessity, so much new product there. Drama is a bit of an exception because it's also where a lot of the high-class Hollywood stuff goes. So it's not seen as a break-in place. It's either like extremely one or extremely the other. It's either a dumping ground or it's like, Hollywood level acting happens here, and if it's happening there, then it can be prestigious very quickly, if it gets into like Sundance or whatever. But like horror film, Sundance, those two kind of don't make sense together, right? So what you have with horror films is a whole marketplace of festivals and communities that are almost like they don't even need Hollywood. They just kind of live on their own. They're their own community. The indie horror marketplace is very robust. Often it's even tied to like other parallel industries like the comic book industry. So there's a lot you can do with these kind of other genres that tend to be indie, have an indie spirit to them. And the faith-based genre is similar to the horror genre in that sense, right? There's this whole marketplace outside of Hollywood that's faith-based, because a lot of these films are not made in Hollywood at all. They're made locally with small crews, with often that come from churches, right? I know a lot about this genre, obviously, as a Christian, although I kind of avoided that genre for so long. I mean, I never enjoyed really the faith-based genre until more recently. It kind of felt like an insult to me as a Christian. Like, it's like, I'm a Christian artist. I'm not like, I don't make propaganda. I don't make like stuff that's like disingenuous, And I don't believe in making second-rate art for God. I don't think that's respectful, So I think if anyone should be respecting God, it's Christians. So the fact that they don't tend to focus on making good art is, to me, insulting, frankly. I think instead we should be championing like just high quality art. And even if it doesn't have a Christian name on it, to me, it's high quality art is valuable. I don't care where it comes from. God shines on the righteous and the wicked, and so and rains on us as well. So it's like artists can, be gifted by God and not be a Christian, and still do great, incredible work. The temple of the Lord was made by non-Jewish people.
Right.
So
Herod's temple.
Yeah, it's kind of strange, the idea that you would have only a Christian plumber come to your house and fix your house. That's just a little purist, you know? So these are technicians, and you want highly skilled technicians to make good art. You know, you kind of need that. So, I mean, if a church is like requiring Christian church membership from every person that helps build their building, it's kind of silly, really. It's not practical. It's not useful. It wasn't done in the Bible. So us requiring that now is kind of cult-like. It's weird. So, nevertheless, you know, people have this weird purist thing these days. I think it did start, I think, with the iconoclasts. And they started getting very purist-minded, almost Gnostic in the way they were thinking. And, you know, to where physical things to them were impure. That's Gnosticism. You know, like, you know, anything physical is just like some impurity. It reaches an extreme. So, you know, to where you don't. Yeah, go ahead.
I remember feeling in the 90s this like this feeling of like separation, like you know, that there's that verse, I think it's in Romans, it says, actually I'm not sure where it is, but it says, just do not be like the world, basically.
Right.
And I felt like that verse was quoted a lot around the time when I just had newly become a Christian in the 90s, and so there was this idea of just separating yourself culturally, and people were like kind of getting rid of all their
like secular music,
their secular
things
music.
Like that. Yes, I experienced that as well. And there's an element to that I think is very valid. Like there's nothing wrong with like the monastic orders of the old Christendom. Like those guys did great things in my view, and it is good to purify yourself from the world.
And I
but
think
he said
the heart of it is saying, I don't want any of this old stuff anymore. Like I just want to be with God now. Like I'm renouncing that old life and embracing the new life in Christ. Right.
But I'm seeing lots of scriptures, you know, where he's saying like, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. Like you are salt, you know, and when salt is lost its savor, it's not good for anything. So like we serve a purpose, right, in the world. And so he does send us out into the world often to influence, to protect. There's a protective quality that we have in the world where it's kind of like we're the grease in the wheels, right? Like we are the often we're getting ground up, right? Like as martyrs, but often also we are kind of bringing civility to a community that didn't really understand civility before. Like, why should we respect people of different stripes? Well, you know, why should we do that? Well, Christianity has that answer. So a lot of people just don't, you know, if they're relying on some kind of Darwinian metaphysic, it's not going to work. You know, there's no reason why if there's somebody that they don't like in their community, they shouldn't just get rid of them in their view. And, you know, that's some kind of sacrificial lamb, or some kind of, sacrifice to their God or something, you know. So it's like Christianity does tend to have a purifying quality just by the nature of us being around, and so we don't even necessarily need to proselytize for that to happen. But I do think that, considering the Great Commission, part of our duty is to proselytize and to be a good example to those around us, you know, in love. It's not meant to offend or to harm necessarily, or to disrupt anybody in their lives. But we know that that's going to happen, like just naturally. So the scripture speaks about this in so many ways. I mean, and so, I do believe that there's a value to being in the world, but there's also an incredible value to being out of it. And I think a lot of that has to do with your faith and your calling. I mean, God gives you a calling, and he equips you. Like, much of this just comes from the community you're born in, the family you were born in, the situation you were brought into. And so some people can handle a lot more as it comes to influences around them and it not affect them. It's kind of like people who are vulnerable to drug abuse. Like, if you're vulnerable to drug abuse, meaning you have an addictive personality, you probably shouldn't be around drugs, right? So there are people who, spiritually speaking, the more they're around dark spiritual things, the more it affects them badly. But there's other people who God blesses in a way to where they have like a suit of armor on to that, and it doesn't really affect them the way it affects others.
Yeah.
So this is something that you have to deal with in good conscience, and just with honesty with yourself and with your spirit and with God, to admit you're not a perfect person. You're only limited to what God can allow you to handle and what God wants you to do. So don't compare yourself to other Christians too much in this manner. Like, other people you might admire, but you might admire them because they're so different from you. That doesn't mean you can do what they do. So some people are just born missionaries. Some people are just not that way. They are homebodies. They're phlegmatics, right? They want the same thing over and over. They don't want new things, new adventures. They lack the good, stable 40-hour work week. That's what they want, And so those are important people too,
Right.
So how did we get on the subject though?
We were talking about filmmaking, and you were talking about Christian films.
Yes, the genre, wasn't I? Faith-based genre. So there's a lot I have to say about this, because I really feel that I've listened to faith-based reviewers quite a bit. I've listened to podcasts by Christians, and some of the most renowned reviewers I've listened to, and obviously I agree with most of what they say, but I feel that often they are either super harsh on the faith-based genre, or they're very permissive about it. And I'm kind of somewhere in the middle between that. I have a very pragmatic approach, and yet I have an idealistic approach about art. So to me, it's about like, here's where we are. That's okay, accept where we are, but here's where we want to go. And it's a very different place where we are now. So this is a long journey. And a lot of people just don't have the narrative in their head, the goal-making and plan-making ability to accept the fact that we just aren't there now. And that's okay. Like, don't get frustrated with other people or with yourself. This is a long journey. So the faith-based genre is not where it needs to be. But guess what? It's getting a lot closer now since changes in the last few years. And so thank God for that. But, a lot of people, for example, with these reviewers, a lot of people do not consider the faith-based genre a genre. And that's because I don't know why they think of it as some kind of special exception to the rule or something. But this is just not true. It's a genre. It's a market of its own. It's part of the film industry and the film market. And that means it's its own genre, because a genre is a style of film that has its own market. And you can gauge it. You can gauge its growth and its dips and its highs and lows in the marketplace. You can gauge how well it does based on the kind of style the film is and the audience that came out and when it came out, what time of the year. All this stuff is just market demographics. Like, it's just marketing stuff. And so faith-based is just a technical term for that genre. So don't get, like emotional about like, oh, this is not a genre. No, it is. It's a genre of film, and it's not been a very robust one, in my view. And here's what I mean by robust. I'm not talking about quality like good or bad. I'm talking about the dynamism within that genre. In other words, how much you can stretch that rubber band and it has some elasticity to it. Like, in other words, you have a robustness of artists in that field, in that genre, who are stretching what the genre entails. So, like, you have some of the standard people who do the same thing over and over, and then you have some kind of experimentation in there, and that signals a growth in the genre. So, if like, for example, drama is the biggest genre because it blends so well with other genres. So you'll have a drama comedy, or you'll have, a drama, a family drama, or you'll have something like that. Well, the same thing's true for faith-based, right? If you were to experiment with it, like if you experimented with it, you could have a faith-based action movie and a faith-based horror movie and a faith-based this movie, but you don't see that. So there's not a lot of growth, robust growth happening in the faith-based genre. It's very kind of like static. And this means there's not a lot of creativity coming into the marketplace. And there's a cultural reason for that. So, being that it's made up of people who think differently than just an artist thinks. There's a whole ideology, there's a whole religion attached to this. So it's outside of the actual craft of filmmaking. There's a lot of other things that go into what makes a Christian artist. And it's not related to film. Like, it's a lot of other stuff. So that means it's difficult for, let's say atheist filmmakers to understand the faith-based film genre. They're not going to be able to relate to 90% of the filmmakers in the genre. So what they say to them just doesn't matter. So that means, this is what it means. It means that you have to rely on the conventional formula of that genre if you want to work together with people. So that means you have a very static formula in order to make a film together. So, you'll have a producer from Hollywood. They might not be a Christian at all. And the only reason they want to fund this film is because faith-based films make money. So they're willing to give you $5 million because they know you'll get them some money at the end of that. So, and also it's kind of like a little bit of a family film. It's got kind of like a clean cut like vibe to it. So there's not a lot of controversy there. The film industry likes that. They don't really want that much controversy because it's a risk averse industry. Like, they don't like a lot of risk. So, because it's hard to actually make money in the film industry. A lot of people don't know this about the film industry. It's generally you lose money, So what that means is you have to make most of your films on non-risk averse kinds of product. And then, stuff that already makes money, right? And then you can maybe make one or two films that year that are more risky, that are more like daring and interesting, artistic maybe, a little bit cutting edge. And so, but what you see with the faith-based genre is that's even more extreme. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, and they primarily, in my view, have to do with Christianity, and where Christianity and business kind of interact. And that's a very interesting kind of conundrum, but nevertheless, it's not like the rest of Hollywood in that sense. And that's all this is a lot of the reason I avoided it for so long. It was just not, it's like a hard nut to crack, So were you going to say something?
I was not, no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I heard you struggle to hold your tongue or something.
No, just listening.
Well, let me go back to telling my story because
Okay.
before I even started considering faith-based genre, I was basically working as a local Tampa Bay-based filmmaker who's trying to kind of get that one project that hits. And that's kind of really what you want in the film industry. You want, especially if you're a new indie like producer or something or director, is that you want material that is a little bit actually risky. And a lot of people don't like that, sure, but my view is that your first film or your second film, like one of your first films, needs to be a little bit artistic and daring and risky. And then you basically, the way you treat it is, you don't treat it as something that's going to make money. You don't treat it as something that's going to get sold. You treat it as something that gets attention. That's really all it is. So you're like dumping thousands and thousands of dollars at Hollywood's direction just so that someone will look at you and go, and turn their head and go, oh, look at that guy. That guy was really daring and really made an interesting piece of art. Like, that's quite interesting. And so at least it gets some attention. And so in getting that attention, right, you can then hopefully whip that into an investor for your next film. And so I still kind of believe in that technique. And I think I don't see a lot in it that's a bad technique. It just, you have to get attention in Hollywood because there's just so much competition. So, but the way I look at it now is it's less about appealing to Hollywood and more about appealing to like social media, And so that's more recent, but I don't believe in Hollywood now the way I used to. So, so essentially I was training to be a producer. This is for a good 10 years. I guess a little less than 10 years, more like 8 or 9 years. From about 2010 to 2018, something like that. And so the way I was doing this was first working with other people locally, working on shorts. You get a lot of shorts here because they're cheap to make. They're quick. You can produce them quickly. You get like a 48-hour film project every year. You can find new crews this way. You can find new talented people. And you try to form partnerships with people. Yeah. So I'm just my own artist. So eventually what I learned was, I'm a producer, but I'm an artist, right? So how does that work? Because generally the producer is like the businessman behind the scenes who's, doing the accounting for your film or something, or trying to get investors, right? Yeah. And they're kind of shepherding somebody along because they've already made a film before, they know how it works. And so they're getting all these people together to do it properly. And, as a result, they might get some money on the back end of that production. So chances are no, though. They're going to just make teams, and then eventually, like their fifth film or something, will get some attention, and then they will get funding, and then that's how they get paid. It's not because their film is profitable. It's because they get paid a salary of some sort or some kind of lump sum just to make the picture. And that's what they're working towards. That's been Hollywood for like 30 years. So it's studios who rely more on independent producers like myself to take risks. So they don't have to, right? So they rely on people like me who want to get attention, who want to take risks, who know the artists, know crews, know actors, and can get all this stuff together. And the studio can just sit back and decide to fund it or not, And if they fund it, they're getting money then on the back end. They're getting most of the money,
Yeah.
And then what I get is relationships with the studio, and then I get first look deals from the studio. So what that means is it's almost like I'm on staff, but I'm not. Like I'm independent, but like I'm basically on someone's auto dialer. Now I'm on their phone, I'm on their cell phone, and they know me then as this kind of producer. I can do this kind of genre. I can work with these kinds of people. These are the people in my back pocket that I work with. They're my people. And so if this studio exec wants something like this, they have a script that's like this, they're going to look at all the producers that they know. 20 producers. Oh, John's perfect for this, right? And they're going to call me first. And then I'll tell them what my schedule is and what I can do and what I can't do. And so that's kind of how that works. That's what a lot of producers are working towards, is that relationship with the studios. So I was essentially working towards that. But the way I looked at it was I have a lot of contingency goals along the way. Like I don't have just one goal. I don't tend to roll that way. I have like 20 different goals. And then I look at what option is going to best give me good results for all those goals, or most of them. So for me, then what I would do, I went to AFM, and the first year I did that way. I didn't actually go. I kind of studied AFM a lot from a distance because you can actually learn a lot just online. How I did it was there was a community, an AFM community that was an online community. And so it was about getting you to buy tickets and come out and meet people. And that's what they're about, But what they encourage you to do is set up all your meetings first. And so, which is just smart, So that means you make phone calls to all these distributors and you're like, I'm a this, call me back. Or I have this, call me back. Or I'll be at AFM and this is what I made, like I'm on IMDb. And, you want to try to make a relationship with them and try to make us, schedule a meeting. Generally, that's not going to happen with just cold calls, which is, why I didn't do a lot of that. But what I did do, and what they did have, was basically like a site where you could talk almost like social media. So I would end up having conversations with people like me who don't mind just talking about AFM, talking about filmmaking and what their goals are, like what classes they're going to be going to at AFM and why. Maybe setting up meetings. 'Cause this is all about setting up meetings, really. And I would set up meetings with people like me just as much as the distributors. Because why? Because people like me want meetings. So even if it's like, the distributors could take you or leave you, like they're there for you, but what they're really there for is to get the people who everybody else wants. So, if you're a hot name or whatever, if your star meter is going up on IMDb and you've done some cool stuff, well, they want to talk to you, right? But if you're like a nobody like me, like they won't return my calls. So, but who will? Other people like me, like other producers like me.
Yeah.
So I end up talking to a lot of other producers, and you can learn a ton of stuff just from other producers, which I was learning, and I was making friends online, and I didn't need to go to AFM that year. I think that was like 2015 or something like that, 2016 maybe. And so I didn't go to AFM that year, But the next year I did go, and I was making good on all those kind of relationships I was forming. And I got to have a slew of meetings, like a handful of meetings. But one of the ones I loved was a screening where I got to talk to a bunch of producers like me after the screening. And it was actually a human trafficking film. And I had barely no knowledge of human trafficking.
Yeah.
And I watched this film and it was just like devastating to watch. And I was like, no wonder this film is in Hollywood. Like this was actually right when Me Too was happening too. And I was like, I did a tiny bit of research on that just because it's a very relevant thing in Hollywood. And I was just going to show up to LA and do AFM. So I wanted to kind of like do research on it and like, what's going on with all these producers and people in the industry? Is there going to be some kind of shakedown? Like what's happening? So I studied a lot of that, and kind of adjacent to Me Too is the whole human trafficking issue. And there is like this other sex cult called Nexum or something that was involved as well. And that was kind of adjacent to human trafficking. So it's a lot of these connections that you make, some of it's like the dark, seedy underbelly of Hollywood that, there's books written about this and stuff. And a lot of that is just kind of like hype, it feels like. And a lot of people may have left Hollywood and they've had bad relationships, so they kind of want to dump on people. So they, unload some dirty laundry, and then people are like, ooh, some kind of weird conspiracy is happening. And, people just love to talk about that nonsense. So, there's only so much you can believe there. But after you've heard like the 15th story about whatever, you're like, okay, there's something going on there. Okay.
Yeah.
Like there has to be something, about some of these stories,
Right.
And so you're kind of like, okay, I believe it. If it's similar to these other stories, it might have a relevance to it. There might be some veracity to this claim. And is this like how the world is? Well, frankly, yeah. So I mean, you learn about some things. I mean, I had been in law initially when I went to college, and so just studying law, you study some case law, you study some history of law. And just in that, you can find stuff that's like pretty weird and dark and strange. And so, like the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s, like I guess more the 80s. So I wasn't just studying to be a lawyer, I was also studying maybe to do law enforcement. So, and I grew up a Christian, so it's like this stuff is interesting and weird. And, what do you do with that,
Yeah.
So Hollywood has always had this kind of weirdness to it. And then when I go to LA, it does feel pretty weird. Like it does feel pretty kind of like, I don't mean that in kind of like, oh, it's dark and weird. Like, no, I mean like spiritually it's hedonistic and incredibly self-absorbed and shallow. Like it's just incredibly like you can see how a lot of stuff could be under that underbelly. Like,
Yeah.
So and there are real stories here too. Like if you study like true crime stuff, it's not far from a lot of this stuff. But anyway, my point is not to get lost in that, but it's to explain that, there is a whole group of people there who have good material, good film, good artistry, good important film like that human trafficking film that is just Hollywood doesn't care about. Like they're not interested. In other words, they're not necessarily interested in doing the right thing, right? They're not interested in producing a film because it needs to be seen. Like they always act like they do. They always act like they're going to be the one producing the best documentary about whatever. And I'm not seeing that. What I'm seeing is like, is that it's about money. And it's not about doing what's right. It's not about good artistry. It's not about good storytelling. Obviously, the viewers, right, like good storytelling. So that means if Hollywood puts out good stuff with good storytelling, they're probably going to make more money, right? So that's a byproduct of good storytelling. That means they're going to actually want good storytellers, right? Because they're about money. So, but what's of higher value? That's my point. My point is like that actually the artistry is down here, and the script writers are down here, and the important films are down here, and the money, right, is what's really leading. So, it's kind of like what leads in journalism. And so it's not about doing the right thing. It's about the fact that this story is making them money. So it's a sad reality to come to that. But that's kind of what you see, and you can't really ignore that with a good conscience. And another one of the things I learned about myself in AFM is that I'm what's called a creative producer, which means I'm the kind of producer that works with the writer, the director, and the other, craftsmen to ensure that this is of high quality artistically. So similarly to a director, right? But I also hold the director accountable. So to that. But primarily, actually, that's not the role of it. Is really not necessarily production. The role of it is really to make sure that that script from the beginning has the potential to have greater artistic value. So you're the one then optioning that particular script because you're the one who sees the value, the creative value of that. And it'll make money as well, in your view. So, you're still a producer, right? You're not just an artist. You're also a producer. So you have to, like I said, you have to bond this film. It's got to get made. And so you have financial interests at stake. So, but suffice to say, I was more the creative producer. And so I was always trying to work with writers and the creative side to get a better product. And there's the other people who are more the investor producer. They're the ones like who are whining and dining investors. That's just not me. And then there's people who, because I'm not that impressive, like face to face with investors. Like, that's not me. I'm not a salesman in that way. And then there's the ones who are more like the nuts and bolts producer. They're like very much more technical, and they're about the money as it comes to on-set, making sure the money is well spent, making sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and all that stuff. And so they're almost like a line producer. Like that's essentially what a line producer does. But they're just making sure the whole thing is done financially with financial accountability. And they're the ones who often make sure that it's a profitable film. So these producers are probably more like the classic producer. That's essentially what the classic producer does. And they're probably the most responsible type of producer there is. And that's not me. What I think about is I think I have a conscience as a producer. I think about, so when I talk about this film about human trafficking, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this film should exist because it's important. So as a creative producer, I think about the message of films, essentially. And so I want the right film to get made because it's important to get made. And by necessity, there's going to be an audience because it's relevant to people, and also I can better gauge that this risk is going to pay off as it comes to new kind of artistic work. So to me, I'm like a wild card producer. So that means if I'm successful, it could be really successful. And if I'm not successful, in my view, it's worth it because it was the right kind of film to get produced anyway.
Yeah.
It needed to be produced anyway. So that's kind of how I look at myself as a producer.
Yeah.
But after COVID, because I had worked, like I said, AFM with Hollywood stuff, I'd worked locally a lot with local directors to try to get stuff produced here. I had tried to work with combining those two to where, you remember that production I was working on where it was basically an anthology horror film?
Oh, yeah.
I called it The Mother Spider because it was, I knew that it might not be successful, and if it was not successful, then each director I worked with would leave this group and become its own spider, kind of like you kill the mother spider and these baby spiders come out. It's creepy. It's a little creepy analogy, but this is a horror film, so those analogies kind of worked. But that actually didn't happen. But from all of that, which is probably about a decade's work, I've got a feature film you can't watch. I've got a few short films you can see online. I did direct 2 shorts, and I almost directed 5 different features. It was like some of them, it was a few months' work, and then I was like, no, this is not going to work. And then others was a good year, where Floridiana was a good year and a half or so, where I was plugging away at trying to make Floridiana, and I just couldn't find the right avenue, or I couldn't find the right actors, basically. And I also I have to admit, and this is kind of a newbie error on my part, but I have to admit that I got pretty discouraged after watching a film that had a very similar plot as mine. And then after seeing it, I was like, this is not that good. I like it, but it's not that good. And it's also so similar to my own film that it's it makes me feel like my film won't be that good as well. It's just not, it's almost not worth, delving into. And so I think that's kind of a newbie error, because when you think about it, it's when is that not going to happen? Every few years, someone's going to make a film similar to what you wanted to make. Don't let this discourage you. Just make stuff anyway. But, that was just one of the films. Another one was, I just couldn't produce it. And one was just too dark. And as a Christian, sometimes I'm like, I can't produce stuff that's that dark. I can produce a lot and I can do a lot, but this was just a little too dark. It was the one called Punishment. It was just a little too, seedy. And sometimes I just can't. I don't want to bring that kind of thing into the world. It had there was a good intention behind making it, but it was just so these are a lot of swing and misses. And I'm not ashamed of that at all. Like, I don't think that was a bad thing, but it's just often what you have to do when you're an artist. You just have to keep kind of in a way, reinventing yourself so that you are learning more, and you don't stop your journey. You just kind of like, you learn more, and then you change the course of where you're headed.
Yeah.
But COVID changed a lot because, okay, well, let me talk about Film Bar Mondays.
Okay.
Because that, like, first of all, we had a daughter, and this was 11 years ago now. I wrote my first script when she was in the womb, right? That was Blood Covenant. It was that film, or that script, which I could not make into a film. It wasn't really meant to be made into a film, but it was just kind of like meant to be the first feature film that I wrote because I wanted to write it. Like, that was the only reason I did it. I needed enough motivation to write a whole feature film. So I needed to motivate myself well enough. And so it wasn't about producing it. It was just about writing it because I wanted to write it. And then at the end of the day, it was like, yeah, I probably can't produce this. But that was more of an afterthought. I didn't want to be concerned with that. And that's one of the mistakes I often make, is I'm so hypercritical of myself that I'm like, you get into this where you're like you're crippling yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of like telling yourself that you really just can't do it. And you're kind of chopping yourself off at the knees. You really have to just start small sometimes and just move forward. Like, you can't. If you demand too much of yourself, you're just always going to fail. So. But I think good artists have high demands, high expectations for their craft. So they do demand a lot, but they don't have to demand a lot of themselves at first, right? I think what you want to do is you just start with a few exercises, and you say, well, what can I do? And then you just start doing those things, small things, and then it gets bigger and bigger and better. So I think that's also with all the failures. You have to have a lot of failures, and then that's kind of like the small things, right? And then as you just keep going, it doesn't really matter if you fail or succeed. You're just getting bigger and bigger because you're learning so much more. So that's kind of, I don't know, I think you just have to accept that.
Yeah.
So Film Bar Mondays was the result. The reason it happened was because during that period where I was where I was producing, and I was learning how to be a producer in Hollywood, I was seeing kind of like how things worked, what the film industry is like. And one of the things I wasn't seeing in my local film community was good film networking. In Hollywood, you have these famous kind of tropes of how Hollywood works. And it's not just a trope, it's the reality quite often, which is that you have Hollywood lunches, you have Hollywood parties, and you have kind of like mixers. And so those kind of three things, you could say, is kind of how Hollywood functions. Which is to say, this is how they build community. And so you go to a lunch, that's much more formal, obviously. So people like producers are doing these kinds of things. You're going to a lunch with somebody, and that means you talk about life, but you also talk about business, and you talk about what you want, and you talk about, what you can do. And then you might even come out of that with a handshake deal, But that's not necessary. What you're just doing is building a relationship with somebody and with kind of parallel goals, you know, and that's how that works. With a Hollywood party, it's like that, except much more informal and fun. So, you know, I don't do those because I don't belong to that world. So if it was a Hollywood party, it would be like something from somebody who I trusted, if I was to go to one, which I've never done. But, you know, you hear about these things. But essentially, let's just say if this was a party that took place at a person who's a Christian at their house, and they were having like a grill out or something, cookout, like, something, where nobody's passing around illicit drugs, something like that. And, maybe then I would show up to that kind of party. But generally speaking, no. Like, I don't do that kind of thing. I'll meet someone at a bar. I'll meet someone in a club. I'll meet someone for lunch. I like the public meetings. I think that's a little safer. Did I just say safer? That just sounds weird. The reason I say that is just because, I think people are less likely to act a fool in public. At least less likely. And then maybe you've even got it on video. So, and then there's what was the other one I was saying? Oh, a mixer. Yes. A mixer is one that almost anyone in film knows. Like, you might not do the Hollywood lunch because you're not in Hollywood. You might not do the Hollywood party because you're not in Hollywood. You might not know any rich person, so they're not inviting you to a party. But here's what you do get. If you've made a film and you've been accepted to a film festival with that film, you get a mixer at that film festival. And these mixers happen in Hollywood. They happen in New York. They happen in every major city. They happen at every film festival. And basically, it's where you stand around with a drink awkwardly and talk about, hey, what did you do yesterday or something? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's shooting the breeze. And I don't like them quite often, but at least you can meet somebody,
Yeah.
and you don't have to know anybody. Like with the other two, you have to know somebody already. At least with a mixer, you could be, you're really stretched with your abilities to just be social. That's the good thing about a mixer, is that you kind of have to be a little bit relaxed. You have to be a little bit relatable. These are all skills you really should have in the industry. I thought, well, this is something that we can at least relate to in the Tampa Bay area, is like a mixer. It's a very important skill to learn. It's kind of like, it's also, here's the other great thing about it, is another thing you learn if you're a director or a writer or a producer, you have to learn how to pitch your stuff. So where are you going to do that? You know what I'm saying? Like, are you really going to meet someone in an elevator and do an elevator pitch? I hope you're not working towards that. No, it's called an elevator pitch because it's got to be short. But you do that at a mixer quite often, right? Yes, you can do it at a Hollywood lunch if you happen to be in Hollywood. Yes, you can do it at a Hollywood party if you happen to be invited to one. But what's a higher chance is that it's going to be either at some kind of actual business meeting, or it's going to be at a mixer. So it forces you to learn your pitching skills as well. And so this is something that in the local community, at least, we can kind of relate to and understand. And so there's my whole backdrop. This is my background. This is why I learned Film Bar Mondays was important. And then I went to Atlanta to meet some people, and we met at a place called Film Bar Mondays, who my friend Tom told me about. He's a writer up there in Atlanta. And so I knew him from before when he lived in St. Pete and down here in the Tampa area. And so so he told me, you know, like, hey, you want to visit? Come up here. We'll, you know, meet me at Film Bar Mondays, and gave me the address, and we went out there, and it was a mixer, like that's what it was, and I was like, so what is this Film Bar Mondays? What does this mean? Like, what is this about? Oh, well, it's basically an Atlanta creation for the film industry in Georgia to kind of take a little bit of that Hollywood vibe as it comes to community and networking, and just kind of like create a networking group that meets every Monday night in 4 different places throughout Atlanta. And so that means, you know, if you're like from the northeast part of Atlanta, you only go to that one Film Bar Mondays that one time a month. And then, you know, but there's 4 of them happening throughout the month. So one every week on Monday night, and then you know where it's going to be. And then you can go to hang out at a bar with anybody in the film industry locally. If they go to Film Bar Mondays, they could be a director, a writer, producer, an actor, and they're there next to you in the mixer, and you're just like, hey, how you doing? Anybody shooting a film? I need to be on a set. And so I'll do whatever you want. I'll be a PA or whatever. And, you know, what do you need? So that's how you can get work in Atlanta in like 5 minutes. And so they would fill up a bar with industry professionals and take over the bar. And because they did it on Monday nights, the bar needed the business. So they didn't mind some, you know, some business networking group coming in.
It was a slow night.
Yeah, it's a slow night. Like, they want people. And that's why Judson made it that way, the founder. And so it was very effective. It's still going to this day in Atlanta. And so I was like, can I bring this back to Tampa Bay?
Yeah.
Maybe I can do that. So I went to Film Bar, and then I came back home, and I was like, maybe I'll just make something similar. And then someone was like, no, just ask Judson if he would let you start a chapter, basically, in Tampa. And, you know, so that's what I did. And he said yes. And we started one, and I had been doing it for a good, I don't know, 7 or 8 years.
Nice.
So I brought it down to Florida. I did it the same way he does his. I borrowed the name, basically, just like he said I could do. You know, we started out, we were doing maybe 20 people. Like, that was 20 to 30 people who were regulars. Not really up to 30. That was, I think we might have had one meeting where we were up to 30. But I mean, this is nothing compared to Atlanta. I mean, they have a huge industry there compared to what we have done here. So, I mean, I knew that. I was like working uphill. And I thought we would just grow because, like, we could bring people into the industry. I mean, you didn't need to know anything. And so you just, basically you come out, you have a drink, you talk about film. You know, you hang out and shoot the breeze and become friends with people. And then you're working with people on your set that you already like, and they're your friends. So you're like making good stuff together. Like, that's basically, you're forming a community around common interest, and you're just paying into that community and helping your friends. So it's such a simple concept. So many people didn't get it. They really didn't get it. In fact, there were people who accused me of being selfish, self-aggrandizing, and trying to manipulate or harm people just by having the meeting. I mean, yeah, I mean, I had friends who were just like, eventually they were like, John, this is like a dumb idea. That's kind of the kind of people we're talking about. And I love them. I love them all. Like, I wish they would come out and just hang out and talk film and try to make good films. But a lot of people, they are not interested in being nice. Like, they're not interested in doing anything nicely. You know, they want to just, they want you to leave them alone, I guess. So, yeah, this is, you know, this is kind of like how a lot of that stuff went. And, you know, I haven't given up on it. It's not like it's discouraging me to the degree where I'm like, I don't see the value of it. Of course it has incredible value. And you know, I hold on to the name and I hold on to the purpose of building the film community, but it's not going to be what they want it to be. Like, that's just, you know, like like a lot of people don't get it, and they're just not going to get it. But that doesn't mean we're not going to still do great things with it. So, but I am on hiatus with Film Bar Mondays now. And I intend to bring it back soon. I'm hoping for July, to bring it back in July. But this is no guarantee because I have some things I have to line up before the July. And I don't know if that's going to happen. But, you know, I can't say too much on it because honestly I don't know the whole plan, but it's like we just want to bring it back in a different way. And the way I'm thinking now, and this is probably the most I can say about it, the way I'm planning to bring it back now is kind of like a enthusiasts club of doers, if that makes sense. Like, we're an enthusiasts club. Maybe I shouldn't even use the word enthusiast. That sounds a little bit unprofessional. A club of filmmakers who want to get stuff done, you know? And one of the things I was afraid of doing, because I didn't see this happening in Film Bar in Atlanta, and so I didn't kind of like want to emulate, I wanted to kind of emulate that, is that I wasn't intending on leading. I wasn't intending on being some kind of leader. It was more like I always saw myself as like a facilitator. You know, like when you have an event organizer, it doesn't make you a leader. You're just kind of like, you know, you're there to kind of make sure all the pieces are in place. But then you just kind of step back and let people just have a party, you know? Like, they don't need you to be the life of the party for that party to happen. Like, you're just facilitating it. And so that's kind of how I saw myself, is kind of like, I'm just here to make sure this is being organized well, but I'm not really the life of the party. I'm not really making it happen. I'm not really the community itself necessarily. I'm just one member of that community, like everybody else. So, you know, I didn't really see myself as so important. And now I'm starting to feel like I'm going to have to lead this group. So if that makes any sense, like I feel like I'm going to have to lead us in a certain direction in order to really get stuff done. And I feel like we just weren't getting stuff done. And that wasn't the intention of Film Bar. Film Bar was just a hangout. But people didn't want to hang out that much. And that's fine. Like, I'm actually fine with getting stuff done, but that was not my initial plan to do that. So what COVID did, and this was the sad part for me, it was even more sad than the whole learning that I'm not liked by a lot of people. And so they didn't want to do Film Bar, and learning that a lot of people didn't understand producers, and so they didn't want me to produce for them. This was even more difficult because what COVID did was made people feel like they didn't need to meet in person first of all.
Yeah.
And then second of all, I learned that the reason for this is all political. Like it was all a political reason. And
Yeah.
so I learned that it was less of a community of friends and more of just like people who like were judging me for wanting to come out and meeting. And so they wanted to make this a political statement to not show up, basically, and to also like not talk to me after that. So I wasn't identifying my politics ever at Film Bar. And even when I would have friends with, friends who I talked to more intimately at the group, I would barely ever say what I believe politically. But everybody wanted to make it political. So, like, okay,
Yeah.
I guess you lose. You don't get to come out to a networking group.
Yeah.
And people want to stand by their politics more than they do their film or their storytelling or their friendships. So I found that really discouraging, probably more than anything. And so that was kind of like, just that people felt like that was an important thing, that was more important than film to them, was really strange to me,
Yeah.
So maybe in 2021, it was like early 2021, it was like, I've got two people coming out to the meetings.
Yeah.
Like I literally had 2 or 3 people who were coming out, once a month. We reduced the meetings to once a month, and we had to meet in different locations too because a lot of the locations had shut down. And then when they came back, they wouldn't come back late at night, which is when we usually met. So a lot of people, this affected a lot of people. And so, I basically met, and then I was meeting anyway, and then what we decided to do was start a podcast instead.
Yes.
So I called this the Film Bar Review.
Yeah.
And you can,
those were really cool.
Thank you. Yeah. My friend Tim Mannix was one of the people who were meeting with me still. And so I said, hey, Tim, instead of coming to this hangout where nobody else is coming, and, why don't we just go to your house and record a podcast? And that's how we did it for about a year. That's basically how we did Film Bar Mondays for like a year, is just the podcast. And then we would share the podcast out to people in our film community. I don't know if it got any views, but it was just like, what I wanted to do is talk about you guys, talk about your films, talk about all your war stories with making films, and talk about, maybe just filmmaking in general, how to make films better, stuff like this. So it was about the local film community here and all of our war stories making films. And it's a lot of fun. Like, me and Tim, we committed to 12 episodes, like 1 episode per month. And we did that. We weren't always on time, but we were like, that's what we did. And that I learned a whole ton during that time. And that's actually what gave birth to Media Moses, because we talked about how Hollywood is changing, how everything is changing, and what we need in our communities now to make sure independent film and cinema survives, and survives the whole streaming nonsense. And so Media Moses kind of came from that. And I think I'm going to have to talk about Media Moses next time, because like this is just part of Media Moses. Like,
that would be awesome.
Yeah, and like I feel like I'm sorry to many of you because there's so much to say here, but it's already almost like 10 o'clock, and I've barely scratched the surface on all of this stuff. So there's a lot to say about it, and I didn't even realize there was so much to say about it. But it's just like one of those things where it gives you an understanding for why you are where you're at right now. And I need that myself, because like, how did I get to where I am now? Making podcasts and doing a YouTube show, and like I want to bring back Film Bar Mondays again, but it's not easy. Like, if you understood where I came from, you would understand that you don't just start one of these meetings and then goal accomplished. No, there's a reason you're doing these things. And so, you also got to understand that if we don't do something different, you're just going to end up doing the same thing over and over again. And so you have to kind of like give yourself, I think, a second look and go, Jon, what is it I'm missing about the local film community, and what is it I'm missing about filmmaking in general? I haven't made the kind of films I wanted to make. I haven't made all the stuff I wanted to do, you know?
Yeah.
And look, why did it happen that way? So, this is kind of a long discussion, but it's a very useful discussion for me. I don't know about you, but it's like, it's necessary and important to talk about,
Yeah.
because it's kind of like doing a diary or something. It's like, if you've not written a diary for yourself, it's like it gives your life a certain kind of context where you're like, oh, this is where I came from last month. I was doing this other thing, or last year, and you're like, oh, like I've learned a great deal since then.
Yeah.
Like there was 15 things between now and then, and when you get to write that down and kind of see it, it really provides you with so much context for your life. Like, this is where I'm headed. There's like a trajectory you're traveling in, and you can try to accomplish something, but then there's like what happens anyway, and so you can kind of see like this larger narrative happening, and it's kind of inspiring in many ways. But it also helps you on your path, like, because you can get discouraged and lose your path, like lose what you're trying to accomplish. And so if you have something like that, you can look at it and go like, oh, this is kind of where I went astray, and either I need to get back on there on the path, or I did get back, and thank God, but I learned something along the way, you know. So you get to kind of reestablish that. But I appreciate you guys. Thank you for listening to my whole nonsense rant about my film history. There's
It
a whole,
wasn't nonsense.
well, because who cares, right? But like, it provides you with a little bit of understanding where I came from, and kind of like my strengths and weaknesses, like who I really am. Like before I did film, I was doing music and other stuff too. So there's stuff there that you don't even know. Like I haven't told you. And so I was writing songs and stories before all of the filmmaking stuff. So it's not like writing was just a second, like a secondary or tertiary thing. No, it was primary to everything I was doing. And then I met my wife, and then learned that I could make films. And then we went through a lot of other stuff. And Rebecca went to college, and we started doing event videography and all kinds of other stuff like that. There's a lot to say about all that, but suffice to say, here we are now, and I got a whole other plan I never thought I would have, like just 5 years ago. Like, a lot has changed since
Yeah.
then. part of the whole film networking thing was also learning about marketing, or rather part of the whole producing thing in Hollywood was learning about marketing, the value of marketing, the value of, all these things. So there's a larger plan that we have with Media Moses that, like, a lot of people are just not seeing the importance of this. And so next week, I hope to talk about Media Moses, like its origins, what it's about, why we're doing it, and delve into that. So sorry people didn't get to hear from you much, Rebecca.
That's okay.
Can you?
No worries.
Go ahead. Can you tell people where to find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Rebecca Loves Jesus on Facebook and YouTube, and you can find me at Jesus Loves Rebecca on Instagram. And where can people find out more about you, Jon Croft?
Well, you can listen to one of my really long-winded episodes like this one, or you can follow me on at Jon Edward Croft on X, or Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft, or culturalwarfare.locals.com, and you can also see my writing on MediaMoses.com. And so yeah, we're trying to grow, and love you guys, and thanks so much for listening. And what do we say? Stand up for the culture. And for Jesus.
For the culture.
That's right. All right, guys. Love you, and talk to you next week about Media Moses.